nonprofit radio coverage of 18 NTC. You know what that is. It's a nonprofit technology conference. You know where we are. We're in New Orleans at the Convention Center. This interview is sponsored by Network for Good, easy-to-use donor management and fundraising software for nonprofits. And they're sponsoring it. They didn't schedule it. My guests are Raj Aggarwal, Sabelo Narasimhan, and Glamarys Acevedo. Raj is president of Provoc. Did I say that right? Provoc.
That's correct.
Okay. I didn't ask about pronouncing your company name. I only asked about your personal name.
You did a great
Your real
job.
name,
Most
Provoc.
people pronounce our company name wrong too.
Provos? They say a
They
soft
say
C.
Provoc.
Provoc. Oh, no.
Which is the traditional Latin version of the name.
All right. And Sabelo is a North American Digital Campaign Manager at 350.org. And Glamarys is the Professional Development Specialist at Mamatoto Village. Raj, Sabelo, Glamarys, welcome.
Thank you. Nice
Good to have you. Thank you very much for spending time and sharing your wisdom. Your seminar topic is bringing your whole self to work. Let's start down at the end there. Glamarys, what's the trouble? What would you like to see people do better when they go to work each day?
Right. I think our session's going to be really.
Oh, you haven't done it. You haven't done it yet.
We haven't done it yet.
Oh, we're still in the exciting phase. Okay.
Exactly. So this is a little preview, right?
Yes.
So we're really going to be speaking about, who has the privilege of bringing their whole self to work, and who doesn't, right? So I think some of us work in places where we do not have the privilege to bring our whole selves to work, right? Because there might be, things, implications to those actions of bringing your whole self. And then maybe some of us work in places where we feel like we're getting closer to being able to have an environment where we can bring our whole selves to work.
What is the whole self? What do you mean? You have to forgive my voice. I've done about 30 of these interviews. I say, what do you mean? What do you mean when you say the whole self?
That is a great question. So I believe, from my experience, I've been in workplaces where I had to bring a version of myself to work so that I could, excel within maybe their parameters, but it wasn't maybe my whole authentic self, unlike where I work now, where I feel like I can bring my whole authentic self, and it's something that's really valued, and I'm able to excel in that and grow in myself instead of growing into something that someone else wants me to be.
But what is your whole self?
My whole self. I mean, that is complex.
I'm going to ask everybody.
That's such a layered, right? Because I
don't know.
I'm multifaceted, so there's so many layers to my whole self. So I feel like that's a really parsing that out in 25 minutes is. I could take the whole entire session to do that.
No, you can't do that. But start with you're a woman.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that's great. Yes. I'm a woman. I identify as a woman. I identify as a Black Latina. I identify as, in my workplace, this is important, I identify as someone who is single without children. So those are some things that, come up. I'm bilingual. Those are certain things that come up in my workplace that I'm able to bring my whole self in that. And I feel like those aren't factors that are used against me, which I think in some environments it could be.
And it
has been.
Has been.
And has been.
Not just could.
No, but has been. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sabelo?
Yes.
How do you let's before I ask how you define your how to describe your whole self, but before that, what's your intro to this topic? Why did you feel this was a necessary session at NTC?
I feel like in the nonprofit world, there's been a lot of conversation over the last few years about bringing your whole self to work, and most of it has been led by cishet white males and women, and they are proposing practicing vulnerability and taking risks and not worrying about being judged or the implications of bringing your whole self to work, and they see it from a very narrow, myopic, which it means something entirely different for a person of color. It means something entirely different for someone like me to bring my whole self to work, and the consequences are often not positive. So, there's a lot of weighing of choices that are made about when and how to bring your whole self to work so that it's actually supporting yourself and not putting yourself in dangerous situations.
Okay, I guess we're going to talk some about creating an environment that enables
Yes,
someone to bring their whole self.
exactly.
Okay, the way Glamarys feels comfortable. Who is your whole self, Sabelo?
Well, again, as Glamarys said, that's a complicated
Okay.
question, but I identify as a trans, queer, immigrant of color, and I have a lot of identities, but most of which are not the mainstream at the organization I work at. And so I'm often used to being in situations where I'm the only X or the only Y or the only Z, you know?
Yeah.
So
How does that feel?
it feels isolating. It feels difficult to contradict what the expectations are for a leader to look like, what the expectations are for a person who's doing good work in the organization to look like, and the particular ways that I need to be supported rather than undermined for bringing my whole self to work.
Yeah, it makes my eyes water, actually. Raj, welcome.
Thank you.
How would you define the need for this session?
I too believe that a lot of the conversation that's happening is often technology is important, design is important. I make my living doing it. But I think that we often have to leave who we really are when we come into interactions with other people. And I think the ending result is products, environments, people just not being as effective as they could be if we really tapped into the soul, authentic selves, who we are. And so I find that the more that I'm able to be my whole self at work, it gives our clients, it gives the rest of our team permission to be themselves too. And I find working together with them ends up being a lot better, and what we produce ends up being a lot better. But I think sometimes we're just too oriented on on some expectation of what it should all look like versus what it truly is and how it's continuously evolving.
You feel if there are parts of your whole self that you have to withhold, then you're withholding your best work.
Yeah,
And maybe not consciously, probably not consciously, but if you can't be yourself, you can't give everything that you can to your clients, your organization.
Yeah, I think it really pulls back on our ability to create creative solutions. I think that this idea that there's a separation between work and life just doesn't make sense to me. I'm the owner of my company. I've been doing that for a long time, and I do the work that I do, and most people in the nonprofit work do the work that they do because they love it. You know, the number of people that I've spoken to that have been, no offense, hoodwinked by their organizations because they believe in the mission, but they're not being paid well or treated well, but they believe in the mission over and over again, and on top of that, they don't get to be them, but they do it because they love it. So in one way, you could say that they're being manipulated by the system to do this thing, and then at the same time, they're not able to be themselves at the same time. But the only reason that they're there is because they love it. So I think distinguishing those two needs to go away.
Who's your whole self?
Yeah, well, I think it's also complex, the way that my wonderful colleagues here have mentioned. But one of the things that I talk about a lot of different things. I'm male. I'm a primary owner of a company, and so I'm also a male who's in a position of power. My heritage is from India, and I'm a person of color. I'm on a very interesting journey around race because I'm not black, I'm not white, and that's seems to be obviously a really big conversation that's happening in America today, and always and has been for a long time. But I'm also formerly a heroin addict. And so I told my story on NPR about 3 years ago, and I was very public about it. I wasn't anonymous about it, and I found a lot of freedom from doing that. Not only, just in general. And it's opened up a lot for me by having to release holding that back, whether it be with clients or whether it be with my team or with my family or with the rest of my South Asian culture. Just these things. Once you remove the shame, or whatever people might impose as shame for some choices that you make that aren't mainstream.
Yeah, hopefully it's what people impose, not what you're feeling. But
those are so
that's a hope.
intertwined because
Yeah.
it's about
Yeah.
acceptance. It's about being loved. And if we don't have that, then yeah, we don't feel comfortable being ourselves.
Briefly, what was the NPR story about with regard to heroin addiction?
Yeah, they talk
they-
about this thing called the opioid epidemic, which
Yeah.
I think is baloney because people of color have been impacted by heroin for over 40 or 50 years at the very least, at least in this country. And now that it's become showing up in more, rural communities, maybe impacting more people that are white, it's become this quote-unquote epidemic.
I see.
And so I really wanted to talk about how it was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to go through in my life. As I was doing the interview, I had the privilege of having my parents with me, and they heard things that I had experienced that they never even knew was there. And so it was a tremendous amount of healing between myself and my family.
That your parents heard some things for the first time in front of a mic?
In front of a mic. It was all recorded. I have it. I can share it with you, Tony, if you'd like. Yeah.
Okay.
It was seven.
That's pretty authentic radio.
It was 7.5 minutes, and it was picked up by national NPR and played all over the place. And I got hundreds of people reaching out to me, especially of South Asian background, being like, how can we talk about this because I'm struggling with some of the same things.
If someone wants to listen to that, can they just Google your name and NPR? Will they?
They can, and the name of the interview is called Heroin Addiction Sucks. It totally does, just for the record.
Okay. Sabelo, who are the people that can bring their whole selves to work without fear of shame, being downcast? What population is that can comfortably bring its whole self?
I think, at least, especially in the American context, but really globally, we live in a system of white supremacy, and that is seen as the mainstream, that is seen as the norm, that is seen as,
White male, I presume, is what we're talking about.
White women too.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of there are huge blind spots these folks have, white folks have around. There's just so much that they don't even think about. They don't question because they've just been entitled to just be themselves, and it's okay to bring their tears in, or it's okay to bring their decisions in without worrying about, will people listen to you, will people respect you. They can delegate, they can do all these things without ever having questioned it.
I want to challenge something though. You feel like women can bring their whole self comfortably? White women? I'm not sure.
For me,
it feels like yes.
For me, race and gender are like central to my thinking, but race is the primary driver. Like, it's the biggest elephant in the room in every workplace I've been a part of in the U.S. And for me, that overshadows what white women experience, which can be challenging. But like, for example, in nonprofits, including my own, there are tons of white women in leadership, and there have been. So, they do experience certain forms of oppression, and that might limit their ability to bring in, whether they're a mother or whether other parts.
Right.
But there's also, I think, additional blind spots created because they feel like they're, put down by the white men, and so therefore they don't have to analyze their own reiteration of those kinds of behaviors.
All right. Glamarys, how do you feel about that? White women being able to bring their whole self?
Yeah, I completely agree with Sabelo on that. And because I think white women, what I think has not been highlighted is that white women, they really do uphold white supremacy, right? I think that is the root of what we're speaking of here. And the fact that we're constantly, I feel like the narrative is always like, oh, the white men. And it's just like, but if you look at it's the white people, and white women are a part of that. And I feel like even in my experience with nonprofits, like, at the end of the day, yes, they have other parts of themselves that they have to bring into work, but I feel like have that privilege to be able to do that in a way that people of color do not get to do that. So in that sense, I'm not willing to sort of, be like, oh no, white women. No, like they also uphold white supremacy, and so we have to talk about that dynamic in the workplace.
How about the workplace? That's where I want to go to. Creating a workplace that is inclusive, that doesn't impose shame, fear, discrimination, recrimination. Let's start, since we're down there with you, Glamarys.
Sure.
What strategies can you share? Because we have a lot of listeners who are CEOs, executive directors.
Right.
Among our listeners, what do you want to say?
I would say, hire black people in roles of leadership, hire black women in roles of leadership. I think, like, at the end of the day, like, getting those people into those roles of leadership is going to affect the dynamics that are happening at nonprofits that are kind of like a monolith right now, right? Like, it's, white on top, and then maybe, as you trickle down, it'll be, more people of color. But that's not the way, like, if you're really wanting to be inclusive, that's not the way to get it. To be like, oh, we met some sort of quota because we have enough, workers of color. And it's just like, but where are they within the company, right?
What about the pushback that there aren't enough applicants of color at senior leadership positions?
And so with that piece, I would go to the job description, and you can see the racial undertones even within that, right? Like what? When you put in there, like when you put into job descriptions, maybe not including like maybe experience, but really trying to highlight like education. We already know there's very like large disparities within like even educational requirements, but someone might have the experience, just from working to be able to be a great person for this role, but because you have maybe this piece in here, it's like, oh, they have to have, a master's degree and this and that. You know what I mean? Like those kind of sort of prerequisites really end up excluding people from being even able to even apply, correct? So I think even like looking into that, I think when people are writing up, they're just job description, what they're looking for, if they were if they really were to look at it and parse it out, they're looking for a white, male, white, female, really to fit into these roles. They may not be doing it consciously, right? But they are doing it subconsciously. And so that's something that I've, been able to see whenever I'm going to go up and apply for roles. I think I may be a really great fit for this, but because of some of these markers that they have put in there, they're not realizing that they're really excluding from people to apply. So people of color, like, they're out there and they're ready to take on these roles and be really excellent in these roles, but it's really first of all, the environment of those nonprofits. Do people even want to apply there? Because it might be one of those things that Raj is speaking to, where it's like the mission seems amazing, but then you look at like the culture of it, you're just like, I'm not really even wanting to be a part of that, right? So that might also be contributing to why those organizations feel like there isn't that pool of applicants, right? But the people are out there. That there's no one can tell me that there's not people of color who can come in and apply for these roles. But I think it's a lot around the the word escapes me. But the marketing, markers of it, but
okay. But isn't education a reasonable requirement for senior leadership? I mean, if it's a CFO, it's reasonable to expect a degree in finance.
Correct. I think, but I hear you on that piece. I just feel like what's not being thought about is people's experience coming into these roles, right? Like if you have these like defined markers of like you have to have this, that's, and that. Like when it comes to, I think the educational piece.
You mean something like a bachelor's degree or further in finance, or equivalent life experience?
Right, exactly. I'm starting to see more of that happening, which I think is super important. I think that is a better way of sort of approaching those sort of things whenever job descriptions are being put out there. But yeah, so I'm definitely speaking to that.
Yeah,
what else do you see? Raj?
As an employer, I totally agree. One thing that I found is that I had no idea how much code was in the language that I was putting out in my job descriptions, and I'm a person of color. And
what else did you find besides education?
Language like professional or expertise or networks of people where I was putting out the job description to. Because if I kept on putting it out to
But don't people of color have networks, and aren't they professional? And I'm missing.
Yeah, even
I'm
the word.
why those are markers.
No problem. Even the word professional is code for a certain type of person that might adhere to what the standards are of whatever professional is.
I think you have to start with the assumption that there is a qualified person of color for every role you're hiring for, and that you do not need to lower your standards in order to get a person of color in those roles. It's just about changing the language. Most people get jobs through networks,
Right.
through who they know. There are stats that black college graduates from the same schools get jobs at much lower rates than the white college graduates from those same schools. It's clear that the disparities are there, even with equivalent education. So you just have to retune yourself. You have to reframe the job based on that assumption that, like, you're not reaching the right people that you want to bring in to actually get creative, innovative, new thinking in your company, and like different perspectives, different questions asked, different projects prioritized, because you'll get different people than just those same old people that you've had.
The other part about the issue, specifically with the CFO, which I think is a really good example, the people that run our books at our company don't have a degree in finance. They've been working, and I've been running a sustainable business for over 19 years. And what I find is that the people that often are very dogmatic about particular numbers, they're not really understanding the mission. So when there's a nuance to a particular decision that isn't just about money but about impact, they're not able to discern it in that way. So I think it's more important that they have well-rounded experience or are connected to the mission versus just having the degree that indicates that they were educated by some Ivy League university that says that they can do this thing. But it doesn't mean that all their blind spots are gone.
I'm guessing you would find it insufficient to just have a statement that says people of color we hire regardless of race, sexual orientation, gender, etc. Just to have a disqualifier at the bottom of a job description, I'm guessing you would believe that that's not sufficient.
I would say that's
necessary but not sufficient. It's what?
It's at the very base.
Level.
Okay. What is it? I don't get your point about the word professional or networks, because people of color, people who are trans, I mean, they're professional and they have networks. What am I missing?
Professionalism in America is usually about assimilation. Assimilation to white supremacy, assimilation to an idea of being American. If you have an accent, getting rid of it. If you have dreadlocks, not wearing them to work. There's a lot wrapped up in that word professional that perhaps a lot of people don't think about, white people don't think about, but all the people of color I know do think about the ways in which they conform or code switch to adapt to workplace ideas about professionalism.
Okay. Let's go.
So it's kind of antithetical to bringing your whole self to work if we're talking about assimilation.
Yeah, say more. What do you mean?
Well, if we're all going to be the same, then what's the point of us being individual human beings with our own personalities, experiences, characteristics, perspectives? Like, one of the things that I do in Washington, D.C. is I help to create an inclusive economy. And one of the things that we really try to push out as much as we can is big boxes. And because people want to live in communities where there are businesses that represent their own individual needs, are owned by people within their community, versus everybody going, no offense, to the McDonald's or the Target over and over again. I also know Target has its own place in the world as far as economics go. But the point is, how do we create a unique environment that is a representation of each of our beautiful, unique selves?
Okay. Let's go further then. Beyond the job description, what would you like to say? Sabelo, looks like you have some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, hiring is, of course, a really important prerequisite.
Yeah.
But beyond hiring, retention, support, I have a very strong voice. I have really unique perspectives to bring in that would really help push the work forward, creative solutions to some of the challenges my organization faces. If I'm not in an organization that can support me to say challenging things, if I'm not in a place where that leads to my promotion rather than my demotion or my being
stagnation or marginalization.
Yeah, exactly. Like it really takes a lot of ongoing work to support people of color and marginalized folks in a workplace and to really build up and empower their leadership rather than undermining them.
What form can that support take? I mean, I understand in terms of encouraging the voice, encouraging a voice that's not traditional, typical, but what other, are there other things that employers can do to support, to make that support explicit in the organization? What else? Any like?
I have
I'm
two
looking for
suggestions.
strategy.
One is model as much as you can that it's okay to bring your whole self to work. And secondly, humility and talking as little as possible. It's really, there's so many beautiful voices that just aren't heard on a regular basis. And if you can just sit and listen, what emerges to me fascinates me every single day.
We have, we can spend another minute or so together. Let's see, Glamarys, we started with you. We're gonna bookend. You're gonna be the bookend.
Okay.
We're gonna wrap up with you.
Okay, great.
In a little less than a minute or so. Some encouragement and some motivation.
Oh, okay. So that's the
to make the
okay.
to make the change.
To make the change.
To encourage the diversity that we're talking about.
Yeah. So again, within my work environment, we ended up sort of like creating our own. We talk about this whole like seat at the table sort of thing, and so we just ended up making our own table, right? And so I think from there we have a workforce development program, and we're bringing people in from the community and giving them those skills, that they're not having the opportunity to get in other places. And our hope is that we're going to be able to flood sort of in our field, which is maternal and child health, just flood the field with, women of color, people of color, who are going to be ready to go on to these leadership roles. So that's like a piece that that's how sort of we're targeting that. So I really appreciate that approach.
All right. That was Glamarys Acevedo. She's a professional development specialist, Mamatoto Village. And next to her in the middle is Sabelo Narasimhan, North American Digital Campaign Manager at 350.org. And next to me is Raj Aggarwal, President of Provoc. Provoc. It's Provoc. Thank you, Raj. You're good sport. This interview is sponsored by Network for Good, easy-to-use donor management and fundraising software for nonprofits. I want to thank you so much for being with Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio coverage of 18 NTC. Thank you so much to our panel.
Thank you.